What is this situation that we find in this passage from St. John's Gospel? Undoubtedly, in the crowd who had gathered around Jesus, there were some who were torn. They were wondering, should they stay with Jesus or leave? They had seen the miracles that Jesus was performing. Certainly, signs to them he was no ordinary man. Signs that would give credibility to his claim that he truly came from God. Yet now, what Jesus was saying to them and asking them to believe was truly shocking to them. He was insisting that his flesh and blood were real food and real drink, and that it was absolutely necessary to partake of these in order to have the life he was promising, a life that would endure even beyond death. Some were perhaps hoping that Jesus would somehow let them sit on the fence, follow him, but not have to accept this teaching, nor, God forbid, partake of any such food or drink. It might be difficult for us today, so many centuries later, to appreciate how thoroughly disgusting to pious Jews of the first century was everything that Jesus was saying. After all, they kept kosher, which simply means clean, in their daily habits and customs, and especially in their food and drink. Human flesh and blood were always unkosher, and as food and drink, absurd. And when in their shock at Jesus having said this, they asked him to tone it down. But Jesus responded by becoming even more graphic, using the word mainim, which means to gnaw or chew, just as a dog would on a bone. This then sounded like the talk of an impious crazy man. And so even though they were strangely attracted to Jesus and his teachings, most could not possibly continue to stay in his company. And so we hear they went away. And so, thus it has been ever since. This is the crux of the whole 6th chapter of the Gospel of St. John that we have been hearing over the past few Sundays. In it, we see that Jesus has spoken his word. He has given his teachings, especially as regards his body and blood. And with these, he has, in a sense, drawn a line in the sand. You are either with him completely, or you are not really with him at all. Today's readings from the Old Testament and the Gospel are all about decisions. Yet perhaps on our contemporary scene, more than generations in the past, definitive decisions are something that people don't really like to have to make, especially if choosing one thing means foregoing another. Most prefer to be free. Most want to be able to keep their options open, would prefer to eat their cake, but also have it too. Yet making definitive decisions is what the scriptures and indeed Jesus himself is asking us to do. Indeed, to be aware of the demands that he makes upon us in terms of belief and practice, and then definitively decide whom we will serve, making clear a choice as to whom it is we follow. Rather than false gods and idols as of old, contemporaries today are more apt to fall for rather unorthodox teachings or distortions of the truth that are more pleasing to them. Yet any and all of the above our ways of replacing Jesus as the true source of authority and the center of our unity. While the reaction to the claim of Jesus that his body and blood are real food and real drink, and his command that we consume these isn't as strong for us today as it was for those kosher Jews who heard him in the first century, because we better understand that what Jesus is in fact asking us to do is to partake of his risen and glorified body under an acceptable appearance of bread and wine, rather than engage in some form of cannibalism, though the church has been accused of that from time to time throughout the centuries. Yet still, there are those who would be very uncomfortable with this talk, even whole groups of those who consider themselves Christian, yet who reject this foundational teaching completely and ridicule those traditions who still hold to it. Yet as ever, we are being asked to make that decision. So let us pray to make the right one by taking a stand with Peter as we remain in communion with the church led by his successor, the church we call Catholic, even with its all too human sins and failings. Because our Catholic understanding of the Eucharist is certainly one thing that our church has consistently gotten right and been faithful to, no matter the cost down the ages. And so we say with Peter, Lord, to whom shall we go? For you have the words of everlasting life. And then let us hear those words spoken over the bread and the cup here today, and appreciate that we are receiving the body and blood of Christ so that we may be part of his body, the body that our second reading reminds us he loves, the body that will one day be present with him in his Father's house.